I need to tell you about Mr. Hugh Baldwin, because if I don't, none of what happened later will make sense. And I need you to understand that I wasn't always the person I am now. Cold, strategic, untouchable. There was a version of me that believed teachers were mentors, that hard work mattered, that the system was designed to help kids like me succeed. That version died in room 247 at Coral Shores High School in Miami during the spring semester of my senior year. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was 17, Puerto Rican, first-generation American, and the only person in my family who'd made it past sophomore year of high school without dropping out. My father worked construction. My mother cleaned houses in Coral Gables. They spoke English well enough to get by, but not well enough to argue with administrators or understand the politics of college applications. I was their entire bet on upward mobility. Coral Shores was one of those sprawling Miami public schools that served both wealthy Barrier Island kids and working-class families from the inland neighborhoods. The geographical split created a social fault line that ran through every classroom, every lunch table, every extracurricular activity. The kids from the islands had boats. We had bus passes. They had college counselors their parents hired privately. We had one overworked guidance counselor for 300 seniors. I'd navigated that divide carefully for 4 years. I wasn't popular, but I wasn't invisible either. I played soccer badly, but with enough enthusiasm that the coach kept me on junior varsity. I maintained a 3.7 GPA. I'd gotten a 1,320 on the SAT, which my mother had cried about because it meant I had a real shot at college, had something better than what they'd built for themselves. I had dreams, specific ones, University of Florida, maybe Florida State, a degree in business or engineering, a job that required a button-down shirt instead of a hard hat, a life where my kids wouldn't grow up wondering if we'd make rent that month. Hugh Baldwin taught advanced placement U.S. government and politics. He was 42 years old, married, no kids. He'd been teaching at Coral Shores for 14 years, long enough to have influence with the administration, long enough that newer teachers deferred to him in department meetings. He wasn't the type of teacher students loved. He was too sarcastic for that, too willing to mock wrong answers. But he had a reputation for being smart, for actually knowing his subject matter beyond the textbook. I took his class because I needed the AP credit, and because I was genuinely interested in how government worked. My parents had come here legally, but the process had taken years, had cost thousands of dollars we didn't have, had required lawyers and paperwork and constant fear of bureaucratic mistakes. I wanted to understand the system that had made that so hard. For the first semester, everything was fine. I wasn't Baldwin's favorite student. That was Clara Hensley, whose father was a county commissioner. But I participated in discussions, turned in solid essays, scored well on tests. He called on me regularly. He'd even made a joke once about me becoming a politician, which I'd taken as encouragement. The problem started in January of senior year, right when college applications were due. We had to do a major research project worth 30% of our grade, pick a contemporary policy issue, analyze competing proposals, present findings to the class. I chose immigration reform because I'd lived it, because I could speak to it with authority that most of my classmates couldn't match. I spent weeks on that project. I interviewed my parents about their experience. I read competing bills in Congress. I analyzed economic data about immigrant labor contributions. I presented both conservative and progressive arguments fairly, because that's what Baldwin had taught us to do, steelman both sides before drawing conclusions. I gave my presentation on a Tuesday in late January. 20 minutes, PowerPoint, citations, the full academic treatment. I argued that the current system was broken, that it punished legal immigration while doing little to address illegal immigration, that reform needed to balance security concerns with economic reality and humanitarian values. Clara presented right after me. Her topic was tax policy. She'd clearly spent about 4 hours on it total, recycling Heritage Foundation talking points without much original analysis. Baldwin praised her clear thinking and rigorous approach. When he handed back our grades 2 days later, she had an A. I had a C+. The written feedback was a single line. Superficial analysis. Heavy personal bias undermined objectivity. I stared at that grade for a full minute, certain there'd been a mistake. I'd cited 17 sources. I'd presented counter-arguments. I'd spent more time on that project than anything else that semester. After class, I approached his desk. "Mr. Baldwin, I think there might be an error on my project grade." He didn't look up from his laptop. "No error. But I don't understand the feedback. I presented multiple perspectives and—" "You presented what you wanted to believe," he said, still not making eye contact. "The assignment required objective analysis. You gave me advocacy. I cited data. I showed both conservative and progressive proposals." He finally looked at me, and something in his expression had shifted from the casual indifference of a busy teacher to something colder. "Your personal investment in the topic compromised your ability to analyze it fairly. That's a professional weakness you'll need to address if you want to succeed in college." "Can I revise it? Do it over?" "No, the grade stands." I felt my face getting hot. Clara's presentation was just Republican talking points. How is that more objective than— Miss Hensley demonstrated analytical rigor. "Your work was emotional and unfocused. We're done here." He turned back to his laptop. The conversation was over. I should have dropped it. Looking back, I can see the exact moment where a smart kid would have recognized the power imbalance and retreated. But I was 17, and I'd spent weeks on that project, and a C+ in an AP class would damage my GPA right when colleges were making decisions. So I did the stupid thing. I went to the principal. Dr. Evelyn Maddox had been principal at Coral Shores for 6 years. She was a black woman in her 50s who'd worked her way up through Miami-Dade schools, and she had a reputation for being fair, but not particularly warm. I'd never spoken to her directly before. Her secretary made me wait 20 minutes before showing me into the office. Dr. Maddox listened to my complaint with the expression of someone who'd heard this exact story 1,000 times before. "Did Mr. Baldwin explain why he gave you that grade?" she asked when I finished. "He said I was biased, but I cited sources. I presented multiple viewpoints. Did you consider that he might be right? That your personal connection to the topic might have affected your objectivity?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I worked really hard on it." "I'm sure you did, but effort isn't the same as quality." She leaned forward slightly. "Let me give you some advice. You're a senior. You're this close to graduating. Making an issue out of one grade, questioning a teacher's professional judgment, that's not going to help you. It's affecting my GPA right when colleges are— I understand the timing, but college admissions officers look at the whole picture. They don't micromanage individual grades." Her tone had shifted to something practiced and dismissive. "Is there anything else?" I left her office feeling worse than when I'd entered. That night, I told my parents what happened. My father's English wasn't strong enough to follow all the details, but he understood enough. "You disrespect the teacher?" he asked. "No, You go to the principal about him?" "He graded me unfairly. You make him look bad in front of his boss." My father shook his head. "That's stupid. Very stupid." My mother was quieter, more worried. "This teacher, he has power over your recommendations?" And that's when I realized what I'd actually done. Every college application required teacher recommendations. I'd asked Baldwin for one back in November, before any of this started. He'd agreed. Said it wouldn't be a problem. I'd thought that meant he saw potential in me, that he'd write something meaningful about my analytical skills or work ethic. Now I'd gone over his head to complain about him. I'd implied to the principal that he was either incompetent or unfair. I'd handed him a reason to destroy me, and he had the perfect weapon to do it. The recommendation letters were due in 2 weeks. I couldn't withdraw my request. That would require explaining to colleges why I suddenly didn't have a government teacher's endorsement. I couldn't ask another teacher this late in the process. I was trapped. For those 2 weeks I barely slept. I played out scenarios in my head. Maybe he'd be professional. Maybe he'd write something neutral and generic. Maybe going to the principal had actually scared him into treating me fairly. I was so fucking naive. The first indication that something was wrong came in mid-February. I'd applied to University of Florida, Florida State, University of Miami, Florida International, and University of Central Florida, a range of reach schools and safety schools that my guidance counselor had said made sense for my GPA and test scores. UCF was the first to respond. Waitlisted. FIU, which had been a near certain acceptance based on my stats, rejected me outright. Florida State, rejected. I sat in the guidance counselor's office, staring at the thin envelopes, trying to understand what had happened. The counselor, a tired woman named Mrs. Sloan, looked genuinely confused. "This doesn't make sense," she said, pulling up my application on her computer. "Your numbers should have gotten you into FIU easily. Even FSU should have been realistic. Could it be the recommendations?" She hesitated. Teacher recommendations are usually just confirming information, unless there was something really negative. "Can I see what Mr. Baldwin wrote?" "Teachers submit those directly to colleges. We don't have access." "Can you ask him?" Another hesitation. "I can try." She couldn't get him to show her. He cited privacy concerns and professional protocol. But she did manage to extract one piece of information that made my blood run cold. His recommendation had been detailed and substantive, not the kind of generic 3-paragraph form letter that most teachers wrote. Something longer, something specific. University of Miami rejected me in early March. My last hope was University of Florida, the dream school, the place I'd been imagining myself for 2 years. The rejection letter arrived on March 15th. I didn't cry. I just sat in my room, staring at that letter, understanding with perfect clarity that my future had been decided by a man I'd offended, and there was nothing I could do about it. But it got worse. 2 days after the UF rejection, I was called to Dr. Maddox's office again. This time, Baldwin was already there, sitting in one of the chairs across from her desk. He didn't look at me when I entered. Dr. Maddox gestured for me to sit. "We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to my attention." My heart was pounding. What concerns? Baldwin finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I've noticed some troubling patterns in your behavior this semester. The grade complaint was just the beginning. You've been argumentative in class, dismissive of other students' viewpoints, and increasingly hostile toward authority figures." I stared at him. "That's not true." "I've documented multiple instances," he continued, pulling out a folder. "February 3rd, you interrupted Clara Hensley during her presentation to correct her on a factual point, which you did in a condescending manner. February 17th, you challenged my interpretation of Federalist Number 10 in a way that was disrespectful and inappropriate. Last week, you made a comment about administrative incompetence that other students found concerning. Every single incident he described had happened, but the context was completely inverted. I'd politely corrected Clara because she'd claimed something factually wrong. I'd raised my hand and offered a different reading of Madison's text because that's what classroom discussion was supposed to be. The administrative incompetence comment had been a joke about the broken air conditioning in the cafeteria, but the way he presented it, with dates and his official tone, it sounded like a pattern of behavioral problems. "I'm also concerned," Baldwin continued, "about some statements you've made regarding the college application process. You've suggested to other students that the system is rigged, that teachers manipulate recommendations, that students from wealthy families receive preferential treatment. I never said that. Multiple students have reported these comments to me. Dr. Maddox was watching me carefully. These are serious allegations. If you're making claims about faculty misconduct, I'm not making allegations. I haven't said any of this. So Mr. Baldwin is lying. Her tone was sharp now. He's misrepresenting. That's exactly the kind of hostile attitude he's describing. She held up a hand before I could respond. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to complete this semester without incident. You're going to be respectful in Mr. Baldwin's class. You're going to stop making inappropriate comments about teachers or the administration. If there are any further behavioral issues, we'll have to consider whether you're a good fit for graduation. The room was spinning. You're threatening to not let me graduate? I'm telling you there will be consequences if this pattern continues. She softened her tone slightly. Look, I understand senior year is stressful. College rejections are disappointing. But you can't let that disappointment turn into hostility toward the people trying to help you. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the desk. I wanted to force them to see what was actually happening. Instead, I said, "Yes, ma'am." Baldwin stood to leave, but before he walked out, he turned back to me. I hope you understand that I'm doing this for your benefit. You have potential, but you need to learn how to accept criticism and authority. That's a crucial life skill. The door closed behind him. Dr. Maddox sighed. Go to class, and think about what we discussed. I left her office and walked directly to the bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and tried not to throw up. That night, my parents sat me down for a conversation that broke something fundamental in our relationship. My mother had been called by the school, not by Dr. Maddox, by the assistant principal, a man named Omar Kaplan, who'd explained in carefully chosen English that there were concerns about my stability and behavioral issues that needed to be addressed at home. My father was furious, not at the school, at me. You make us look like bad parents, he said. We send you to school, you disrespect the teachers, you cause problems. I didn't do what they're saying. The principal calls your mother, tells her you have behavior problems, and you're saying the principal is lying. Mr. Baldwin is lying. He's doing this because I complained about my grade. So now the teacher is lying, the principal is lying, everyone is lying except you. My father's voice was getting louder. You think you're so smart, smarter than all of them? My mother tried to mediate. Maybe there is misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, my father cut her off. He wants to go to university, be an important person, but he can't even respect his teachers. How he going to succeed in university if he can't succeed in high school? The argument spiraled. I tried to explain what had actually happened, the unfair grade, the complaint, the retaliation through recommendations. But every time I offered my version, it sounded like excuses. It sounded like a problem kid blaming everyone else for his failures. My father had grown up in Puerto Rico in poverty that made our Miami apartment look luxurious. He'd worked since he was 12. He'd never finished high school. The idea that I would disrespect educated people, authority figures, the very system he'd sacrificed everything to give me access to, it was incomprehensible to him. It was betrayal. Maybe you don't go to university, he said finally. Maybe you work construction with me, learn what real work is. My mother gasped. No, he needs education. Education is for people who respect it. He wants to fight with teachers. He can fight with concrete instead. I didn't argue anymore. There was no point. The final 2 months of senior year were a special kind of hell. I went to Baldwin's class every day and said nothing unless directly called on. I made myself invisible. I watched Clara and the other island kids talk about their college plans, Duke, Georgetown, Northwestern, and I felt the future I'd imagined burning away like paper. I submitted one last-ditch application to Miami-Dade College, the local community college. I was accepted within a week because they accepted everyone. At graduation, I walked across the stage, took my diploma, and felt nothing. My parents were in the audience somewhere, probably crying, probably proud that I'd graduated at all. They didn't understand that I'd already lost, that the diploma was just paper, that the future it was supposed to represent had been stolen by a man who decided I needed to be taught a lesson. I saw Baldwin at the graduation ceremony. He was talking with other teachers near the entrance to the auditorium, laughing about something. He saw me looking at him, and for just a second he met my eyes. He smiled, not a warm smile, a knowing one, and then he looked away, like I was already forgotten. That summer was the worst of my life. I worked at my uncle's auto shop, changing oil and rotating tires, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Community college was the only option, but it felt like a dead end. Like everyone there was just killing time before accepting that they'd never make it out. My father had stopped being angry and started being disappointed, which was somehow worse. He'd tell his friends I was taking classes without specifying where. My mother tried to be supportive, but I could see the sadness in her eyes when she looked at me. The worst part was running into classmates from Coral Shores. They'd be home for the summer from their universities, and they'd ask where I was going, and I'd have to say Miami-Dade, and watch them reorganize their perception of me in real time. The pity was unbearable. In August, right before the fall semester started, something happened that I still think about. I was at a Starbucks near the University of Miami campus, and I saw Clara Hensley. She was with a group of other students, all of them wearing Duke apparel, clearly doing some kind of pre-orientation bonding. She saw me and waved, actually walked over. "Oh my God, hey, how are you? Where'd you end up?" "Miami-Dade," I said. Her face did the thing. The micro-expression of surprise and pity and social recalculation that takes maybe half a second but feels like an hour. "Oh, cool, that's a good school. Are you doing the transfer program?" I wasn't. I was just taking classes because I didn't know what else to do. "Yeah," I lied. "Probably transfer to FIU after 2 years. "That's smart. Save money." She was already looking back at her friends. "Well, good to see you. Good luck." She rejoined her group, and I heard one of them ask who I was. I couldn't hear her response, but I saw her shrug. I sat there with my coffee and thought about Mr. Hugh Baldwin, about how one person's decision to punish me for challenging him had redirected my entire life, about how he was still teaching, still writing recommendations, still exercising that power over kids who didn't know how vulnerable they were, and I thought about how there was nothing I could do about it. No appeal, no recourse, no justice. He'd won, and I'd lost, and that was just how the world worked. That's what I believed then. I didn't know yet that I was wrong. I didn't know that defeat was just the first phase of a much longer game. I didn't know that the person I'd become in that Starbucks, humiliated, powerless, burning with impotent rage, would eventually build something so much larger than revenge. But that came later. First, I had to learn how to survive. Miami-Dade College was exactly what I'd feared. Overcrowded classrooms, overworked professors, students who were there because they had no other options. The campus felt temporary, like a waiting room for real life. I took general education requirements because I still didn't know what I wanted to study. Business felt too generic. Engineering required math I'd never been good at. I drifted through the first semester in a fog of resentment and purposelessness. The only thing that kept me anchored was work. I was still at my uncle's auto shop, but I'd started paying attention to how the business actually operated. My uncle Garrett was a good mechanic, but a terrible businessman. He undercharged customers, didn't track expenses properly, let people pay late or not at all. One day I asked him if I could look at his books. He laughed. "What books? I keep receipts in a box." I spent a weekend organizing 2 years of receipts into a basic spreadsheet. The numbers were devastating. He was barely breaking even despite being constantly busy. He was paying too much for parts because he didn't negotiate with suppliers. He was losing money on labor because he didn't charge enough per hour. I showed him the analysis. He stared at it like I'd written it in Chinese. So what I'm supposed to do? I spent the next month teaching myself basic business operations. I read books from the library. I watched YouTube videos about pricing strategies and inventory management. I built him a better system, nothing fancy, just spreadsheets that tracked costs and revenue properly. Within 3 months, the shop's profit margin had improved by 15%. Garrett gave me a raise and let me handle more of the administrative work. It wasn't glamorous, but I'd discovered something important. I was good at seeing broken systems and fixing them. I was good at numbers. I was good at organization. And I was good at working when I had something to prove. By the end of my first year at Miami-Dade, I'd saved $7,000. I'd brought my GPA up to 3.9. I'd started thinking about business seriously, not as a vague career path, but as a specific skill set I could develop. I applied to FIU's business school for the following fall. I was accepted. It felt like a small victory, but it also felt like the consolation prize. I'd be 20 when I started as a junior. I'd be at a third-tier state school instead of somewhere competitive. I'd be years behind where I was supposed to be, but I kept working. I kept saving. I kept learning. FIU was better than Miami-Dade, but still disappointing. The business program was competent, but not rigorous. The professors were fine, but uninspiring. I was surrounded by students who seemed content with mediocrity, who'd graduate and take middle management jobs and never question whether they could do more. I didn't fit. I was angrier, hungrier, more focused than any of them. I threw myself into classes with an intensity that probably seemed excessive. I read beyond the assigned material. I asked questions that professors found annoying because they required actual expertise to answer. I joined the entrepreneurship club, the finance society, every organization that might teach me something useful. And I started paying attention to the business landscape in Miami. The city was full of money. Real estate, logistics, international trade, hospitality. It was also full of inefficiency. Companies that operated on legacy systems. Industries that hadn't adapted to technology. Opportunities everywhere if you knew where to look. In my junior year, I started a small business. Nothing revolutionary. I connected local businesses with freelance web developers and designers, taking a commission for the matchmaking. It was basically a low-tech platform before I had the skills to build a real platform. I made $11,000 that year. Not enough to live on, but enough to prove I could identify a need and fill it. I graduated from FIU in 2012 with a 3.85 GPA, a business degree, and $23,000 saved. I was 22 years old. Most of my original Coral Shores classmates were graduating from their universities at the same time, the ones who'd gone to prestigious schools, who were probably already lined up for corporate training programs or graduate school. I was nobody. I had a degree from FIU and a small side business. But I had something they didn't. I'd learned how to build from nothing. I'd learned that systems could be gamed if you understood them well enough. I'd learned that nobody was going to hand me anything. And I'd learned to be patient. The first real break came in 2013. I was working at a logistics company in Doral, doing operations analysis, when I noticed that several of our clients were paying us to solve the same problem repeatedly, coordinating shipments between the Port of Miami and inland distribution centers. The coordination was manual, phone calls, emails, spreadsheets that different parties updated inconsistently. It created delays, errors, and costs that everyone accepted as inevitable. I spent 3 months building a basic software platform that automated the coordination. Nothing sophisticated, just a web interface that let all parties see the same real-time information and update status without phone tag. I pitched it to my boss as an internal tool. He liked it but didn't want to invest company resources in development. So I quit and built it myself. I lived on savings and worked 18-hour days for 6 months. I taught myself better programming. I cold-called every logistics company in South Florida. I offered the platform for free initially, just to get users and feedback. Slowly, it gained traction. Companies started paying for premium features. I hired my first employee, a developer who was better at coding than I was. Then a second employee for sales. By 2015, my company, which I'd named Meridian Logistics Solutions, had 14 employees and was generating $1.2 million in annual revenue. We weren't profitable yet. I was reinvesting everything in development and expansion, but we were growing. I was 25 years old. I was living in a decent apartment in Brickell. I was running a real company. And I still thought about Mr. Hugh Baldwin every single day. Not obsessively, not even consciously most of the time, but he was there, in the back of my mind, every time I closed a deal or hired someone new, or saw our revenue numbers increase. He was the voice that said I wasn't good enough, that I'd never succeed, that I was unstable and untrustworthy. Proving that voice wrong had become the architecture of my personality. In 2016, something shifted. We landed a major contract with a national shipping company. The deal was worth $800,000 annually and gave us credibility in the industry. Venture capital firms started reaching out. I didn't want VC money. I'd seen too many founders lose control of their companies that way. But I took meetings to understand what they valued, how they evaluated businesses, what metrics mattered. I learned that they cared about growth rate, market size, competitive moats, and team quality. So I focused on those things. I expanded our platform's capabilities. I targeted larger clients. I recruited better talent by offering equity and vision instead of just salary. By 2018, we were doing $8.3 million in annual revenue with 42 employees. We were profitable. We had a real product that solved real problems. I was 28 years old, and I was starting to be someone. Not famous, not a household name, but within Miami's business community, people knew who I was. I got invited to industry conferences. I was quoted in logistics trade publications. Young entrepreneurs asked me for advice. It felt good. It felt like vindication. But it wasn't enough, because Baldwin didn't know. The people at Coral Shores who dismissed me didn't know. The system that had crushed me was still operating exactly the same way, destroying other kids who challenged the wrong teacher or didn't have the right last name. I thought about trying to contact Baldwin to show him what I'd become, but that felt weak, like I needed his validation. Fuck his validation. I thought about exposing what he'd done, going public with my story, but it was 7 years old. I had no proof. It would just be my word against his, and he still had institutional authority, while I was just some guy with a logistics company. So I did nothing. I kept building. And then, in early 2019, I found out that Baldwin was still teaching at Coral Shores, still writing recommendations, still destroying futures whenever someone challenged him. I know. This because I'd started donating to the school. Not huge amounts, but enough to get invited to alumni events and fundraisers. I wanted to stay connected to that place, to remind myself where I'd come from. At one of these events, I ran into Mrs. Sloan, the guidance counselor. She was older now, close to retirement, but she remembered me. "I always wondered what happened to you," she said. "You were so bright. I was surprised when you went to Miami-Dade." "Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan," I said carefully. "Well, you seem to have landed on your feet. She'd clearly Googled me before the event. We talked for a while about the school, about changes in college admissions, about how much harder it had gotten for students from working-class families. Then, almost casually, she mentioned, "Mr. Baldwin is retiring next year. End of an era." My heart rate increased. He's been there a long time. 28 years. The students will miss him. He's very dedicated. I wanted to ask if he was still sabotaging kids who challenged him. If anyone had ever noticed the pattern. If a single person in that building understood what he was. Instead, I said, "That's wonderful. He must be proud of his career." "Oh, he is. Though I think retirement will be an adjustment. Teaching is his whole life. His wife, Marion, has been very supportive. She gave up her own career to support his." Marion Baldwin. I filed that name away without knowing why. Just instinct. The conversation moved on to other topics, but my mind was elsewhere. Baldwin was retiring. After 28 years of teaching, of shaping young minds, of selectively destroying the ones who disrespected his authority, he'd get a retirement party, plaques and speeches about his dedication, a pension and free time and the satisfaction of a long career, well executed, and I'd get nothing. No acknowledgement of what he'd taken from me, no justice. Unless I created it myself, but I still didn't know. How? I still didn't have a plan. I just had a name, Marion Baldwin, and a vague sense that information was power, even if I didn't know how to use it yet. I kept building my company. I kept growing. I kept becoming more successful, more untouchable, more capable, and I waited. Because that's what I'd learned in the 10 years since room 247. Everything worth having requires patience. Every victory requires preparation. Every reversal of power happens slowly, invisibly, until the moment it becomes irreversible. I didn't know it yet, but I was already building the weapon I'd eventually use. I just needed the right opportunity to deploy it. In 2020, the pandemic hit. And like every other business, we had to adapt fast. Logistics became more critical. Everyone needed everything delivered, but also more complicated. Disrupted supply chains, driver shortages, port delays, the whole infrastructure breaking down. We pivoted hard into supply chain analytics and predictive modeling. If we could help companies anticipate disruptions and route around them, we'd become indispensable. It worked. Our revenue grew 45% that year, while many companies were contracting. We hired aggressively, engineers, analysts, salespeople. By the end of 2020, we had 98 employees, and I started thinking bigger than logistics. The real opportunity wasn't in moving things more efficiently. It was in the data layer underneath all movement, understanding patterns, predicting needs, optimizing entire networks instead of individual shipments. I started repositioning the company. We weren't a logistics platform anymore. We were a supply chain intelligence company. The distinction mattered to investors, to potential clients, to the kind of talent we could recruit. In 2021, we raised our first round of institutional capital, $15 million from a venture firm in Boston that specialized in B2B software. I gave up 18% of the company but gained resources to accelerate growth. We used that money to acquire 2 smaller competitors and to build out our analytics capabilities. By the end of 2021, we were doing $23 million in annual revenue with 147 employees. I was 31 years old. I was worth, on paper, about $47 million based on our valuation. I'd made it. By any objective measure, I'd succeeded. I had money, status, respect, a company that mattered, but I still thought about Baldwin, still felt the rage underneath everything I'd built, still couldn't let it go. My therapist, I'd started seeing one in 2019 because success doesn't heal trauma, kept asking me why I was so focused on one teacher from high school. Because he took something from me, I'd say. What did he take? My future, my first choice, the version of myself I was supposed to become. But you've built a successful company. You've achieved more than most people ever will. It's not the same. I built this out of necessity, out of survival. He forced me onto this path. And you think revenge will give you closure? I didn't answer that, because I didn't know. But in early 2022, the opportunity I'd been unconsciously waiting for presented itself. We were hiring for a VP of operations, a senior role overseeing our service delivery, client success, and quality assurance teams. It was a critical position. We needed someone with strong operational experience, leadership ability, and the capacity to scale systems as we grew. We got 234 applications. One of them was from Marion Baldwin. I saw her resume and felt like I'd been hit in the chest. Marion Hensley Baldwin. 15 years of operations experience at mid-sized companies in South Florida. Strong track record of process improvement and team development. Currently employed at a medical device distribution company. She was qualified, more than qualified. Her experience was exactly what we needed, and she was Hugh Baldwin's wife. I sat in my office for an hour, staring at that resume, understanding that this was the moment I'd been waiting for without knowing I was waiting for it. I could reject her application, move on, let the past stay past, or I could hire her. Not to hurt her. She hadn't done anything to me, but to create proximity to Baldwin's life, to gain leverage, to position myself where I could eventually apply pressure in ways he'd never see coming. It was manipulative. It was potentially cruel. It was exactly the kind of long-term strategic thinking that had built my company. I called my head of HR, a sharp woman named Nora Roth. Marion Baldwin's resume, I said. Move her to the final round of interviews. She's strong on paper, Nora agreed. Though she's been at her current company for 7 years. Might be hard to get her to move. Make sure I'm on the interview panel. Nora paused. You usually don't interview for VP-level roles this early in the process. This one I want to meet personally. Okay, I'll schedule it. Marion Baldwin came in for her interview on a Wednesday afternoon. She was 44 years old, professionally dressed, competent in the way that people who've been working for 2 decades are competent. She had no idea who I was. Why would she? Her husband had taught thousands of students. I was just another one, and not even a memorable one. I'd been nobody. The interview panel was me, Nora, and Travis Hoffman, our COO. We asked standard questions about operations management, about scaling teams, about her approach to process improvement. She was good, clear communicator, thoughtful answers, realistic about challenges. She'd clearly done research on our company. She asked intelligent questions about our growth trajectory and strategic priorities. At no point did she recognize my name or face. I was just the CEO, the authority figure conducting the interview. About 40 minutes in, I asked, "What made you interested in leaving your current role?" She hesitated, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not quite sadness, but a kind of resignation. "I've been there a long time," she said carefully. "I've accomplished what I can accomplish in that environment. I'm ready for new challenges, more responsibility, the opportunity to build something at scale. Your husband teaches, right?" The question came out naturally, like small talk. That must create an interesting dynamic with your career. Another hesitation. Yes, he's a high school teacher. And yes, it's sometimes been complicated to balance his career stability with my ambition. But we've made it work. There was something in her tone. Not resentment exactly, but not contentment either. Like she'd accepted certain constraints she didn't particularly like. Travis asked a follow-up question about team management, and the conversation moved on. After she left, we debated her candidacy. Travis was enthusiastic. Nora had some concerns about culture, fit. Marion was more traditional in her management style than our younger, faster-moving team. "I think she could be great," I said. "She's got the experience, the maturity, the ability to bring structure to operations without suffocating innovation. Let's make her an offer." Nora raised an eyebrow. That was decisive. "You're usually more cautious about senior hires. I have a good feeling about this one." We made Marion an offer the next day. VP of Operations, $165,000 salary plus equity, full benefits, 30 days vacation. It was a significant step up from what she'd been making. She accepted within 24 hours. Hugh Baldwin's wife was now working for me, and he had no idea what that meant yet. Marion started in April 2022. I made a point of welcoming her personally on her first day, giving her the overview of company culture and priorities that I usually delegated to Travis. She was competent from day one. She understood operations intuitively, saw bottlenecks quickly, knew how to get teams aligned. Within her first month, she'd identified 3 major process improvements that saved us money and increased client satisfaction. The team respected her. She had authority without being authoritarian, high standards without being unreasonable. She was exactly what we needed, and I treated her well. Better than well. I made sure she had resources, autonomy, recognition. When she succeeded, I praised her publicly. When she had ideas, I listened and often implemented them. I became a good boss, an enabling boss, the kind that lets talented people flourish. I did this partly because she deserved it. She was genuinely good at her job, but mostly because I understood something about power dynamics that Baldwin had taught me. The best way to control someone isn't through fear or restriction, it's through opportunity. Marion had spent 15 years in middle management, held back by a combination of industry limitations and, I suspected, a husband, whose identity required that he be the primary professional in the household. She'd mentioned, casually in a team meeting once, that she'd considered going back to school for an MBA when she was younger, but decided against it because the timing wasn't right. The timing, I'd bet, meant that Hugh's teaching schedule was inflexible and his identity was fragile. So I gave her what she'd been denied: visibility, authority, growth, respect. I put her on the executive team. I had her present to our board of directors. I sent her to industry conferences where she represented the company. I made sure she got credit for her wins. I paid attention to her without being inappropriate. I asked about her projects, her challenges, her ideas for improving the company. I made her feel valued in ways that were probably unfamiliar to her. And I waited to see if Hugh would notice. It took 4 months. In August, Nora came to my office with an unusual expression on her face. "Something weird just happened," she said. "What?" "Marion's husband called the office, asked to speak with you directly." My pulse quickened. What did he want? He wouldn't say, just that it was important regarding his wife's employment. I told him you were unavailable and asked if I could help. He insisted on speaking only with you. Did Marion know he was calling? I don't think so. I mentioned it to her, and she looked mortified. Said she had no idea what it was about and apologized for the disruption. What did you tell him? That you'd call him back if you wanted to. I nodded. Give me his number, but don't commit to anything. That evening I sat in my office and looked at Hugh Baldwin's phone number on a post-it note. I hadn't heard his voice in 12 years. I'd built an entire life he knew nothing about. And now he was calling me, trying to exert authority in a situation where he had none. I didn't call him back. Instead, I called Marion directly. "Hey, I heard your husband called the office today. Is everything okay?" She sounded embarrassed. "I'm so sorry about that. I don't know what he was thinking. It won't happen again. I'm not upset. I'm just concerned that everything's all right." A long pause. "Can I be honest with you?" "Of course." Hugh is adjusting to me having this role. He retired from teaching in June, and I think he's struggling with the transition, with me being gone more, traveling for work, having responsibilities that don't revolve around his schedule. That must be difficult. It is. He's been very supportive for most of our marriage, but I think this change is harder for him than either of us anticipated. If you ever need flexibility with scheduling or anything that would help with the transition, that's very kind, but no. I love this job. I'm not going to compromise my work because he's having an adjustment period. He'll figure it out. There was steel in her voice. Something had shifted in her since taking this position. She'd tasted autonomy and wasn't interested in giving it back. Well, the offer stands if you need it. You're doing exceptional work, and I want to make sure you have what you need to succeed. Thank you, I really appreciate that. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and smiled. Hugh Baldwin was losing control, and he knew it. His wife was succeeding in ways that didn't depend on him, didn't orbit him, didn't require his permission or approval. And he was trying to claw it back by calling her boss, by asserting himself in her professional life, by reminding everyone that she was someone's wife before she was a VP. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. 2 weeks later, Baldwin called the office again. This time he got through to Travis, who transferred him to me before I could stop him. I picked up the phone. This is the CEO. Yes, hello. This is Hugh Baldwin. I believe you employ my wife, Marion. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, condescending, authority wrapped in false civility. Marion is our VP of operations, yes. I wanted to speak with you about her travel schedule. She's been going to conferences and client sites quite frequently, and I'm concerned about the sustainability of that arrangement. Marion's travel is determined by the needs of her role. She's representing the company at important industry events and client engagements. I understand, but as her husband, I think I have a right to express concerns about how her employment is affecting our marriage. I let the silence hang for a moment. Mr. Baldwin, with all due respect, Marion's employment decisions are between her and this company. If she has concerns about her role or responsibilities, I trust she'll communicate them directly. I'm simply suggesting that you might not be aware of the strain this is causing at home. Marion has never indicated any issues with her role. She's an exceptional employee and a valued member of our leadership team. If you have concerns about your marriage, I'd encourage you to discuss them with your wife rather than her employer. His tone sharpened. I don't appreciate your condescension. I'm not being condescending. I'm explaining professional boundaries. Now, if there's nothing else, I did some research on your company, he interrupted. Meridian Logistics Solutions. Founded in 2013. You're the sole founder and CEO. That's quite an achievement for someone so young. He was trying to establish dominance, to remind me that he'd investigated me, that he had information. We've been fortunate to grow quickly in a competitive market. Where did you go to school? And there it was. The question he thought would give him leverage. FIU, I said. Graduated 2012. Not one of the more prestigious programs. It served my purposes. Strange that someone with your success didn't come from a better academic background. Usually, these rapid growth companies are founded by elite university graduates. The best education is building something that works. Well, regardless of your background, I trust you'll be mindful of how your company's demands affect your employees' personal lives. I'm mindful of treating my employees with respect and giving them opportunities to excel. Marion is thriving here. I hope that makes you proud. The word proud landed exactly how I wanted it to, like a challenge to his ego. Of course I'm proud, he said too quickly. I've always supported her career. That's good to hear. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from the sheer satisfaction of that conversation. He'd called to assert authority, to make me shrink, to remind his wife's employer that she belonged to him first. And I'd dismissed him like he was nothing, because in this context, he was nothing. He was a retired high school teacher with no leverage, no authority, no power, and I was the person who controlled whether his wife kept the job that was making her happy. That evening, Marion called me. He told me about the conversation, she said. Her voice was tight with anger. I'm mortified. I had no idea he was going to do that. It's fine. I understand that transitions are difficult. It's not fine. He had no right to call you. No right to try to interfere with my work. Marion, between you and me, is this job causing problems at home? A long pause. This job is revealing problems that were already there. Hugh is used to being the important one, the professional, the person whose career matters. I supported that for a long time. But now that I have something that's mine, something I'm good at, he can't handle it. What do you want to do? I want to keep my job. I want to keep proving that I'm good at it. And I want my husband to figure out how to support me the way I supported him for 20 years. Then that's what you should do. Thank you for not using this as a reason to reconsider my employment. Marion, your employment has nothing to do with your husband. You're here because you're exceptional at what you do. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. When she hung up, I felt something that might have been guilt. She was a good person. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. But I also knew that I was giving her something real. A career, autonomy, recognition, the chance to be someone beyond Hugh Baldwin's wife. That wasn't manipulation. That was opportunity. What Hugh did with the disruption to his control, that was on him. Over the next 6 months, Marion became increasingly integral to the company. She led a major reorganization of our service delivery that increased efficiency by 32%. She negotiated new contracts with 2 of our largest clients. She was promoted to Senior VP with a corresponding increase in equity and salary. She traveled more. She spoke at conferences. She was quoted in industry publications. She developed her own professional identity completely separate from her husband. And Hugh Baldwin spiraled. I know this because Marion started confiding in me. Not extensively, but enough that I could see the pattern. He'd become controlling about her schedule, demanding to know exactly where she was and when she'd be home. He'd started making negative comments about her success, suggesting she was neglecting their marriage, implying that she was getting too big for her britches. He'd shown up at the office once, unannounced, claiming he was surprising her for lunch. Security called me before letting him up. I went down to the lobby personally. Mr. Baldwin, I said, extending my hand. I don't think we've met in person. He shook my hand, and I saw him trying to place me. There was a flicker of something, maybe recognition, maybe just confusion. But it didn't land. I was 32 now. I'd put on muscle, grown a beard, carried myself with the confidence of someone who'd built something real. I looked nothing like the scrawny 17-year-old he'd destroyed. I was hoping to take my wife to lunch, he said. That's thoughtful. Let me check if she's available. I called Marion from the lobby phone. She came down, saw Hugh, and I watched her entire body tense. They went to lunch. When she came back an hour later, she looked exhausted. Are you okay? I asked when I saw her in the hallway. He wanted to know why I didn't tell him you'd be in the lobby. He wanted to know what kind of boss comes down personally to meet employees' spouses. He wanted to know if something inappropriate was happening. Jesus. I told him he was being ridiculous, that you were just being professional and courteous, but he wouldn't let it go. Marion, I hope you know that I would never. I know I do. This isn't about you. This is about him not being able to handle that I have a life he's not the center of. She walked back to her office, and I stood there feeling the weight of what I'd set in motion. Because I had done this, at least partially. I'd hired her knowing who her husband was. I'd given her opportunities knowing it would destabilize his control. I'd positioned myself as the good boss, the enabling authority figure, creating a contrast with the insecure husband at home. I'd done it deliberately, and it was working. In December 2022, Marion told me she'd asked Hugh to move out temporarily. They weren't divorcing, just taking space. He'd been increasingly hostile, accusatory, suffocating. I need to figure out if this marriage works when I'm not making myself smaller, she said. I supported her decision, offered her additional flexibility if she needed it, made sure she knew the company had her back. Hugh moved into an apartment near Coral Shores. According to Marion, he was telling friends that his wife had been seduced by corporate ambition, that her boss was probably manipulating her, that she'd lost sight of what mattered. He was creating a narrative where he was the victim of his wife's betrayal and her boss's undue influence. It was almost identical to the narrative he'd created about me 12 years earlier. I was unstable, hostile to authority, making inappropriate accusations. The pattern was so clear, it was almost beautiful. In January 2023, something happened that I should have anticipated, but somehow didn't. Hugh Baldwin filed a formal complaint with the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation, alleging that I was engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a married employee and creating a hostile work environment that had destroyed his marriage. It was absurd. There was no evidence because nothing inappropriate had happened. But the complaint required investigation, and investigations require responses, and responses require lawyers. My attorney, a woman named Beatrice Kaplan, was frustrated but not worried. "This is clearly a bitter spouse lashing out," she said. "There's no merit to any of these claims. But we do need to respond formally, and we need to be prepared for him to escalate if this doesn't work." Escalate how? Harassment, defamation, possibly trying to damage the company's reputation. Men who feel they've lost control sometimes get creative with revenge. I thought about telling her what Baldwin had done to me in high school, how this was his pattern, how he destroyed anyone who threatened his authority, but it felt irrelevant to the current situation. What do you recommend? Document everything. Make sure Marion documents everything. Show that her employment is based entirely on merit, that there's been no favoritism or inappropriate conduct, and be prepared for this to get uglier before it gets better. She was right. Over the next 3 months, Hugh launched a campaign. He contacted our clients, suggesting the company was unstable. He posted reviews on Glassdoor claiming toxic management. He showed up at industry events where Marion was speaking and sat in the audience, glaring at her. He contacted the school board where he'd taught, trying to get them to issue some kind of statement supporting his character. They politely declined. He was retired, and they had no interest in getting involved in his marital disputes. He hired a private investigator to follow Marion, hoping to catch evidence of an affair that didn't exist. Every move he made was documented. Every escalation created more evidence of harassment, of a pattern of controlling behavior, of a man who couldn't accept that his wife had her own success. And slowly his reputation crumbled. His friends started distancing themselves. Former colleagues at Coral Shores heard about the complaints and the stalking behavior. People who'd known him as a respected teacher started seeing him as an unstable, bitter man who was harassing his wife's employer. In April 2023, Marion filed for divorce. "I can't do this anymore," she told me. "I thought separation might help him gain perspective, but he's gotten worse. He's trying to destroy my career because he can't control me anymore. I'm sorry you're going through this." "Don't be. This job, this company, you've given me something I didn't know I could have. The courage to believe I deserved more than I was settling for." The divorce proceedings were brutal. Hugh fought everything: asset division, spousal support, even the division of their furniture. His attorney tried to subpoena company records, looking for evidence of impropriety that didn't exist. My attorney provided everything requested and more: documentation of Marion's performance reviews, her compensation history, the business justification for every promotion and raise. It was all clean because it was all legitimate. But Hugh's attorney made another move I should have anticipated. They subpoenaed my educational records. When Beatrice told me, I felt ice in my stomach. Why would they want my educational records? They're trying to establish that you have some grudge against educators, possibly against Mr. Baldwin specifically. It's a desperate move, honestly, but we have to comply. So my records from Coral Shores were submitted. My grades, my SAT scores, my college application history. And there it was, in the file. Hugh Baldwin had been one of my teachers my senior year. A P government and politics. Hugh's attorney flagged it immediately. Scheduled a deposition. I sat across from a mediocre lawyer in an expensive suit and told the truth. Yes, Mr. Baldwin was my teacher. Did you have any conflicts with him? I disagreed with a grade he gave me on a project. I was 17. It seemed important at the time. Did you file a complaint against him? I spoke with the principal about the grade. It wasn't resolved in my favor. Do you harbor resentment toward Mr. Baldwin regarding this incident? I'm 33 years old. I run a successful company. I don't think about high school very often. But you hired his wife. I hired a qualified candidate for a senior position. Her relationship to a former teacher was irrelevant to the hiring decision. You expect us to believe that was coincidence? I expect you to prove it wasn't. Marion Baldwin submitted an application. She was qualified. She was hired. She's excelled in the role. That's the entire story. Did you know she was Hugh Baldwin's wife when you hired her? I'd prepared for this question with Beatrice. The truth was nuanced. I'd known from her resume before the interview, but the hiring decision was based on merit. I saw her married name on her resume. I didn't make the connection to my former teacher until later. It was technically true. The resume said Marion Hensley Baldwin. I'd connected the Baldwin part, but the full realization of exactly who she was didn't hit until I saw her in person. The deposition continued for 3 hours. They tried to establish that I'd hired Marion as part of a revenge plot, that I'd manipulated her into leaving her husband, that I'd used my position as CEO to seduce or coerce an employee. None of it stuck because none of it was true. The truth was more complicated and in some ways worse. I had hired Marion knowing who her husband was. I had created opportunities for her that would inevitably disrupt Hugh's control. I'd positioned myself as the supportive authority figure in contrast to her controlling husband. But I'd also given her a real job where she'd done real work and earned real success. I'd treated her with respect and professionalism. I'd never touched her, never propositioned her, never done anything that crossed ethical or legal lines. The revenge, such as it was, wasn't against Marion. It was the creation of a situation where Hugh would destroy himself trying to reassert control he'd lost, and that's exactly what happened. The divorce was finalized in September 2023. Marion got the house and a generous settlement. Hugh got his pension and the apartment he'd been living in. More importantly, Marion got to keep her career, her independence, her identity as someone beyond Hugh Baldwin's wife. And Hugh got to watch everything he'd built, his marriage, his reputation, his sense of authority, collapse because he couldn't accept that someone close to him might succeed in ways that didn't depend on him. But here's the thing I didn't expect. It didn't feel as good as I thought it would. I'd imagined for years that vindication would be satisfying, that watching Baldwin lose would heal something in me, that proof of my success and his failure would close the wound he'd opened when I was 17. It didn't. The divorce finalized, and I felt empty. Marion was happy, which was good. Hugh was diminished, which was what I'd wanted, but I didn't feel healed. I felt like I'd spent 12 years building a machine designed to destroy one man, and the machine had worked, and now I was standing in the wreckage wondering what it had cost me. I'd built a successful company, but how much of that was genuine passion versus rage at being told I'd never succeed? I'd helped Marion become independent, but how much of that was altruism versus using her as a weapon against her husband? I'd proven I was smarter, richer, more successful than Baldwin, but I'd also proven that I couldn't let go, that 12 years hadn't been enough time to move past what he'd done, that some part of me was still the humiliated 17-year-old in room 247. My therapist asked during one of our sessions, "Do you think you would have built this company if Hugh Baldwin had written you a good recommendation letter?" "I don't know." "Do you think you would have become this person?" "No, definitely not." "So who are you now? The person who succeeded despite him, or the person he created by trying to destroy you?" I didn't have an answer. In November 2023, almost exactly a year after Marion had started working for me, I got a letter. Actual physical mail, sent to the company address. It was from Hugh Baldwin. I sat in my office and stared at that envelope for 10 minutes before opening it. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten. His handwriting was still the same, precise, controlled, exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent 30 years grading papers. It read, "I know who you are now. It took me a long time to remember, but I finally placed you. You were in my AP government class in 2009. You were the student who complained about his grade, who went to the principal, who tried to undermine my authority. I want you to know that I never wrote anything untrue in your recommendation letters. I was honest about your abilities and your character as I observed them. If you believe I sabotaged your college applications, you're mistaken. The fact that you didn't get into your preferred schools suggests that other evaluators reached the same conclusions I did about your readiness for advanced academic work. I also want you to know that whatever you think you've accomplished by hiring my wife and facilitating the destruction of my marriage, it speaks to exactly the character flaws I identified in you as a teenager. You are vindictive, manipulative, and unable to accept legitimate criticism or authority. You've built a successful business, and I acknowledge that. But success without character is hollow. You've destroyed a 23-year marriage to settle a perceived slight from high school. That's not the behavior of a mature, well-adjusted adult. That's the behavior of someone who never learned the lessons I tried to teach you about humility and personal responsibility. I hope eventually you'll realize that the path you've chosen, building your identity around resentment and revenge, will leave you isolated and unfulfilled. I forgive you for what you've done. I hope someday you'll forgive yourself. Hugh Baldwin. I read that letter 3 times, and each time I felt my rage crystallizing into something colder and harder. He'd never written anything untrue, just framed the truth in ways that destroyed my future. Other evaluators reached the same conclusions, because recommendation letters from trusted teachers carry weight that a teenager can't overcome. Character flaws I identified. He'd identified a kid who challenged his authority, and he'd crushed that kid for it. Lessons about humility and personal responsibility. Lessons about knowing your place and accepting what your betters decide about you. And that last part, I forgive you, was perhaps the most insulting thing he could have written. It positioned him as the magnanimous authority figure, me as the wayward student who'd acted out but might eventually learn better. I didn't respond to the letter. There was nothing to say. But I did make one final move. I called Marion into my office. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you react." She sat down, concerned. "Okay. I knew who Hugh was when I hired you. He was my teacher in high school. He destroyed my college applications because I challenged him on a grade. I hired you partly because you were qualified, but also because I knew it would disrupt his life." I watched her face process this information. Confusion, then understanding, then something that might have been betrayal. "So this whole time I've been, what? A pawn in your revenge plot?" "No. You've been an excellent employee who earned every promotion and opportunity on merit, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't know what hiring you might do to his sense of control. Jesus Christ, she stood up, paced to the window. Did you manipulate me into leaving him? No, I gave you opportunities that revealed who he was. What you did with that information was your choice. That's sophistry. Maybe, but answer this honestly. Are you happier now than you were 2 years ago? She was quiet for a long time. Yes. Do you regret leaving him? No. Do you feel like your success here is fake or unearned? No, I worked my ass off. I earned this. Then the question is whether my initial motivation changes the reality of what you've built. She turned back to me, and her expression was hard to read. Why are you telling me this now? Because I got a letter from Hugh. And it made me realize that I need to stop lying to myself about why I did this. I owe you that honesty. What did the letter say? I handed it to her. She read it, and I saw her jaw tighten. He thinks he was the victim in our marriage, she said quietly. He thinks you seduced me or manipulated me. He can't accept that I chose to leave because I deserved better. That's his pattern. Everyone who challenges him is unstable or hostile or wrong. He's always the reasonable authority figure being undermined by people with character flaws. Did he really destroy your college applications? I can't prove it, but I know what I submitted, and I know what happened. The pattern matches what he did to our marriage, framing truth in ways that destroy people while maintaining deniability. Marion sat back down. So what now? Now nothing. He's out of both our lives. The revenge, if that's what this was, is complete. You're successful and independent. He's alone and diminished. And you're what? I'm realizing that winning doesn't feel like I thought it would. She was quiet for a moment. I should probably be angry with you. For using me. For not being fully honest about your motivations. You should be, but I'm not. Because whatever your initial motivations were, you've been a better boss, a better mentor, a better supporter of my career than anyone else ever has. You saw potential in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. That matters more than why you hired me. You're being generous. I'm being honest. Hugh taught me for 23 years that my value was in supporting him, in being the understanding wife of an important teacher. You've taught me that I can be important on my own terms. Even if you did it partly for revenge, the impact on my life is real. After she left, I sat in my office and thought about what she'd said. The impact was real. Marion had a career now, independence, financial security, confidence. That wasn't fake just because my motivations had been complicated, but I'd still used her. I'd still positioned her as a piece on a chessboard in a game she didn't know she was playing, and the person I'd become in order to win that game, calculating, manipulative, willing to use people strategically, wasn't someone I particularly liked. I thought about the kid I'd been at 17, earnest, hard-working, believing that merit mattered and systems were fair. That kid was dead. Baldwin had killed him, and I'd built something harder and colder in his place. I'd succeeded. I'd won. I'd proven Baldwin wrong about everything, except maybe the part about character. December 2023, 1 year since Marion had asked Hugh to move out. 2 years since I'd hired her. The company was doing well. We'd grown to $47 million in annual revenue, with 212 employees. We'd expanded into predictive analytics and were beginning to work with Fortune 500 companies. Marion was thriving. She'd started dating someone, a civil engineer she'd met at an industry conference. She smiled more. The tension that had defined her for the first year had dissolved into something that looked like genuine happiness. I'd won. By any objective measure, I'd achieved the revenge I'd spent 12 years unconsciously planning. But I kept thinking about Baldwin's letter, about his claim that I'd built my identity around resentment and revenge. He wasn't wrong. I'd built a successful company, but I'd also built a prison. Everything I'd accomplished was measured against that moment in room 247, against the humiliation and injustice, against the need to prove that I was worth more than Hugh Baldwin had decided I was worth. I'd spent 12 years carrying that weight, and even now, with Baldwin discredited and Marion independent, and my company successful, I couldn't put it down. My therapist asked me again, "What would it take for you to feel like this is finished?" And I realized the answer was nothing. There was nothing Baldwin could do or say that would give me closure. There was no amount of success that would heal the wound. There was no revenge satisfying enough to make me whole. Because the problem wasn't Baldwin anymore. The problem was who I'd become in response to him. I'd learned his lesson perfectly, that power matters, that systems can be manipulated, that people are vulnerabilities to be exploited. I'd learned to be strategic, calculating, patient in my retribution. I'd become a more successful version of exactly what he was. That realization hit me like physical pain. In January 2024, I made a decision. I wrote Baldwin a letter, not to respond to his fuck his forgiveness, but to say something I needed to say for myself. Mr. Baldwin, you wrote that you never lied in my recommendation letters. That's probably true. You just framed the truth in ways you knew would destroy my applications. You presented a 17-year-old's challenge to your authority as evidence of character flaws. You used your position to punish a kid who disrespected you. You did the same thing to your wife, framed her success as betrayal, her independence as abandonment, her happiness as evidence of manipulation by her employer. The pattern is clear. You can't tolerate anyone close to you succeeding in ways that don't depend on you. You use authority to control, and when control fails, you use narrative to destroy. I did hire Marion knowing who she was. I did create opportunities that would disrupt your marriage. I did it deliberately. But here's what you don't understand. I didn't manipulate Marion into leaving you. I just gave her what she deserved: respect, recognition, the space to be competent and ambitious and successful. The fact that those things were incompatible with your marriage says everything about you and nothing about me. You wrote that success without character is hollow. You're right. But you should look in a mirror when you say that. You spent 30 years shaping young minds, and the lesson you taught was that authority is for punishing anyone who questions it. I learned that lesson well. I spent 12 years building power so that I'd never be vulnerable to people like you again. I succeeded. But I also learned something you never taught, that revenge is hollow too, that winning doesn't heal you, that becoming untouchable just means you've built a cage so perfect that you can't escape it even when you want to. You destroyed my faith in systems and fairness and merit. You forced me onto a path I wouldn't have chosen. You made me harder, colder, more strategic than I ever wanted to be. And you were right. I do have character flaws. I'm vindictive. I hold grudges. I can't let go of injustices even when letting go would be healthier. But those flaws aren't the reason you gave me that C+, or wrote those letters or tried to destroy me. Those flaws developed afterward, as defense mechanisms, as armor against ever being that vulnerable again. You broke something in me, and I built a life around the broken pieces. I don't forgive you for that. I probably never will. But I'm done letting you define me. This is the last time I'll think about you. The last time you'll matter. Not because I've forgiven you or moved past what you did, but because I'm choosing to stop giving you power over who I become. Marion is happy. She's successful. She's free of you. That's the only revenge that matters. She gets to be herself without your permission. I hope retirement is everything you hoped it would be. I hope you spend it understanding what you lost and why you lost it. I'm sure you'll find a way to blame everyone but yourself. Goodbye. I didn't sign it. He'd know who it was from. I sent it and felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not closure, not relief. Just the exhaustion of carrying weight for 12 years and finally deciding to put it down, even if the damage was already done. The company kept growing. Marion kept succeeding. My life continued. But I'd changed something fundamental in myself. I stopped measuring success against Baldwin's judgment. I stopped building every achievement around proving him wrong. I started building because I wanted to build, because I was good at it, because it mattered on its own terms. It didn't heal the wound. I don't think that wound ever fully heals, but it stopped bleeding. And maybe that's as close to winning as people like me ever get. Not the victory, not the revenge, not the proof that we were right all along. Just the decision to stop letting the past dictate the future, to stop being defined by what was done to us, to stop becoming the worst version of the people who hurt us. I'm 34 now. I run a company worth over $200 million. I employ 237 people. I've built something real and substantial and meaningful. And every single day, I have to choose not to let Hugh Baldwin's voice be the one that defines whether that's enough. Most days, I succeed. Some days, I'm still 17 years old in room 247, staring at a C+ I didn't deserve, learning that the world is fundamentally unfair and authority is fundamentally corrupt. Those days are getting less frequent, but they still come. That's the real cost of injustice. Not just what it takes from you in the moment, but what it makes you become in response. The ways it reshapes your personality, your relationships, your understanding of how the world works. Baldwin taught me that power is the only thing that matters, that vulnerability is weakness, that trust is for people who can afford to be disappointed. I learned those lessons so well that I became untouchable. And untouchable, I've discovered, is just another word for alone. Marion is happy. She has her career, her independence, her new relationship. She got the freedom she deserved. I have my company, my success, my proof that Baldwin was wrong about me. But I also have the knowledge that I spent 12 years building a weapon to destroy one man, and in the process, I became someone I'm not sure I like very much. That's the ending. Not triumph, not vindication, not the satisfaction of revenge, just the cold realization that I won, and it changed me permanently. The question I'm left with is whether that change was worth it, whether the person I became in order to survive and succeed is someone I would have chosen to be. I don't have an answer yet. Maybe I never will. But I'm done pretending that success is the same thing as healing. I'm done confusing power with safety. I'm done building my identity around what was done to me instead of who I want to become. That's not forgiveness. That's not closure. It's just the decision to stop letting Hugh Baldwin win by making me into a worse version of myself. And maybe that's the only victory that actually matters. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.